it doesn't disprove God. There is no scientific experiment that has ever disproved or proved the existence of God.
You didn't kiss me on the way in. You didn't kiss me on the way in. That would be a HR problem.
So if it evolved, random chance and mutation over billions of years is just an extraordinary statistical difficulty for me.
God can create the world in 6 days if he wants. He can create the world in 1 day if he wants. He's sovereign, he's in control, he can make it happen. He can use science to make it happen. He can direct evolution if he wants. There has to be some kind of intelligent design and purpose behind it.
Welcome to Beyond the Sermon, where we go beyond the Sunday sermon and talk about real questions that shape our faith and everyday life. Together, we'll unpack hard topics, share honest conversation, and explore what it really means to follow Jesus in today's world. Subscribe and follow us to keep up with future episodes. But for now, we hope you enjoyed today's episode.
Hasn't science disproved God? Then why are we still talking about Christianity and the Bible? And so today we're actually going to be talking about this topic and we're going to be unpacking it. And we're going to be having a look at Tim Keller's book called The Reasons for God, where he actually asks this question. But we'll have Deb with me today. Deb, you've got a science background. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about that?
I do. I have an applied science, so I've got a couple of science degrees, one in applied science with occupational therapy and one in applied science in osteopathy and a master's.
Wow.
And actually it was through my science degrees. I've been a Christian all my life, but it's through my science degrees that doing sort of quite in-depth anatomy subjects, which actually increased my faith.
Wow.
Looking at the science and, how we are created and the complexity of the human body has actually really moved my faith in studying. So it's quite exciting.
Yeah. Well, when people actually say then that science disproves Christianity, what do you think they mean?
I think what they're probably referring to is that, science has, proved a lot of, or when I say proved, has, researched how things work in the natural world.
Yeah.
And, the Bible talks quite a bit about things that are not of the natural world, supernatural instances and miracles, if you like, so that if science has not been able to prove or understand anything that is not of the natural world, then people can have that sort of disharmony and that tension with what the Bible says about the resurrection of Jesus, or him raising the dead, or having producing miracles. So I think there are that disharmony that people have, that if science can't prove it, then maybe it's not true.
Yeah.
So that's possibly one area, or they feel like that science maybe contradicts parts of the Bible, like Genesis. That creation story, and the people perhaps that are more proponents of evolution or the Big Bang Theory would look at that and say, well, that contradicts the Bible. So again, maybe you can't have a belief in both.
Yeah.
There's certainly that tension in there.
Yeah. And why do you think this whole idea of science disproving the Bible or even contradicting the Bible, therefore the Bible obviously can't be true, why do you think that's such a persuasive argument, especially amongst young people today?
Well, the younger generation have grown up with science and technology.
Yeah.
And they live in this amazing digital age of iPhones and smartphones and, AI.
Information at your fingertips.
Like amazing advances in medicine too.
Yeah.
And there is perhaps a feeling that, science has been able to explain such a lot of things. Maybe it explains everything. There can be that leap of faith that, if science has explained this much in our life, then do we really need faith?
Yeah.
Science has been shown, the way science methodology works is it should be reliable and repeatable and consistent in order for, you to look at hypotheses and answer questions. So, where there is that reliability, I think sometimes the younger generation might give science an authority, if you like, over faith. Younger generation also perhaps have less of a trust in institutions now. You know, there's been some scandals and hypocrisies that have been seen in big institutions, some governments, some institutions, and even in some churches. So that can really shake people's trust, perhaps, in institutions. So that may be a factor also. And it always makes me laugh. I don't know if you've noticed this, Shell, but when you watch movies and you have, say, a scientist, you know, in the movie, and or a religious type person of, you know, religious persuasion or working for the church, the way they're portrayed is always really interesting. The scientist is almost always portrayed as being, you know, the truth teller and open-minded and, you know, seeking, the truth and the facts, and the religious person is not always portrayed like that. They're always, you know, maybe dogmatic or slightly crazy. You know, that actually has some influence, I think. You know, it's a powerful picture.
It's really stereotyping.
Quite stereotypical. Absolutely.
And playing them off against each other as well.
Correct. That's right. That the person of faith has almost like a blind faith. There's nothing reliable, or there's no evidence to hang that off. So it's interesting. It's quite an interesting time to live in, I think, with the advancements of science that we have now.
And Tim Keller actually points out in his book that science and faith are not enemies. They're, in fact, science was birthed out of a Christian worldview. And when I started my science background, and I went to uni, studied science, I had never thought that science was against the Bible. I had never thought there was science against Christianity, and I'd never heard of that. And so I'm 17, about to turn 18, started uni, and I remember some of the first classes, and I'm very open about Christianity. I'm open about who I am, volunteered a lot at the church, and I think, you know, in the first few weeks, people were like, why would you as a Christian study science? Isn't that like against what you believe? And I had never heard that before. I'm like, what do you mean against what I believe? Like, I just did not have that worldview that science and Christianity were against each other. But I'm very aware that in some circles, they're pitted against each other.
Correct.
But I didn't have that. I didn't have that because, very similar to you, the more that I studied science, the more that I want, this points to a creator. A creator. In fact, I was in one astrophysics lecture. That was not my major, by the way. That was a one-off subject that I had to do. But we were talking about, obviously, the universe, and the lecturer was talking about the Big Bang and the statistics for us to have got where we have gotten, especially on a molecular level, and really painted this picture of this is impossible without, like, you know, intentional, like a creator behind it. But he never said that. And so everyone left the lecture theatre and was like, what just happened? Did that guy just say that there has to be a God? And it was brilliant for me because everyone left super confused, but not confused. It's like he led them there, but he didn't say it. So I don't even know to this day if that guy is a Christian. I just remember going, this proves my point. God is good. And I just remember thinking, this is like my opportunity to tell everyone, Jesus. So it was brilliant because I go, like, this guy isn't advocating for Christianity. This guy's just literally spitting facts about the universe, about the statistics of you know, random stuff coming together. And I've never thought science disproves God. I've always thought the opposite, that science reinforces the fact that there is intelligent design.
That kind of sort of leads into that fine-tuning argument, doesn't it? That we often hear in in discussions about religion versus science, about the constants and the requirements that are required for there to be life on Earth, and how narrow those parameters have to be. You know, that if there is just slightly more or less gravity, you know, the whole universe would be, you know, either not there at all or implode, or, you know, the gravitational forces plus the nuclear forces would mean that atoms wouldn't be able to bond. You know, there are such amazing, as you say, statistically out of this world difficulties if it is just a random chance thing. If you're thinking evolutionary science and Big Bang, that something has appeared out of nothing, and out of that something, if it's infinitesimally small, then for it to then become more complex out of a simple thing, to then create complexity, and then this whole earth to have these such amazing parameters, is you have to have a lot of faith, more faith, I would say, to believe in that style of, or that narrative of the creation of the earth, rather than a faith in a creator God who created this because he had a reason and a purpose, and all of these are in his intentional design for us.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and back to Callum's point about like science and faith are like not enemies, but science was actually, and how we do science today was actually birthed out of a Christian worldview. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of the scientists that we would all think about as heroes and
great
minds and geniuses, and understand more about the three laws of motion and gravity and calculus, all those mathematical things from Isaac Newton and Pascal and Galileo, Kepler, Boyle. They all had a Christian worldview, and their worldview allowed them to try and understand an ordered world, because it was their idea that God is an ordered God. He has created this universe which has constancy in it, and so from that they could have confidence in their experimentation and further understanding about laws of the natural world. That it was because God had created the world in this way. It wasn't the other way around. They weren't atheists to start with. They were actually Christians to start with. So it's really interesting to see where we've come now, that people, like you were saying before, have an understanding that you can't sort of hold views about science and faith simultaneously. But actually that's how it all started.
Absolutely, absolutely. Here, Calla says that science tells us how things work, but not why. Can you give us like an example of that? And what's the difference?
So science can explain a lot of things about the natural world. So, for example, if you took a musical instrument, science could tell you all about its weight and its density, if it's amount of wood, and if it's a stringed instrument, how tightly the strings would need to be wound up to be tuned to a certain frequency. And then it could explain how if you have a violin, if you drag a bow across it, what the sound waves would be like that, what sort of frequency, decibel level, all of those sorts of things. It can explain a lot of things about the how. It doesn't explain how we feel when we listen to music. It doesn't explain the emotional response that we can have for music.
Or even why we want to listen to music.
Correct. That's right. How it evokes memories for us, of really vivid memories of different parts of our life. So, it can explain many things, but there's lots of things that it cannot explain. And a lot of those things are also to do with us as relational beings. So we were talking before a little bit about sort of anatomy and physiology and our biology. Science has made amazing discoveries about the human body, which is awesome. There's so much to learn, and there's so much we have not learned yet about, the complexity and how things work in our human body. What it can't explain quite so well is why we're relational beings, how we love. What's the emotion of love? If we grow up in an evolutionary background and history, what's that emotion about? How does that promote survival of the fittest and, leaving the weak behind so that your tribe or your community can flourish and excel and succeed where others don't. It doesn't explain a lot of that, that humanness of it. But it does explain quite a bit of the how.
The how, yeah. And I think one of the big things when we talk about pitting science against Christianity, one of the big things is creation and the creation account in Genesis. At the start of Genesis in the Bible, it talks about a 6-day creation. And science today, that's probably the center of the debate, to say, hold on, if Christians believe in this 6-day creation and science has then disproved it to be like, well, actually, the world is millions and billions of years old, those two things are against each other. Again, there's that sort of tension, but one of the big things that I love is a guy named John Walton, and he is a professor, he's an academic, he's biblical studies, Old Testament, and he talks about like one tension that people often raise is Genesis, and the Bible says 6 days, but how do we sort of hold that kind of together? And so it's not even just going, is science trying to disprove the Bible? It's actually going to the other side and going, what does the Bible say about science? Because if we say, science tells us how things work, but not why, is it the other way around where we can say, well, the Bible doesn't necessarily tell you how things were created, but it tells us the why things were created. And we just brought up before about the early scientists, talking about order. And I think about the creation story, and here we have this God who's coming in, creating order out of chaos, and that's exactly what he's doing. And he's not necessarily saying the how, but it's the why. And especially if we read the Old Testament and we read Genesis, in the ancient background of Mesopotamia, from back in the day, and we read it against all the other kind of creation stories that were out at the time. There's Babylonian myths and all that kind of stuff. They're quite similar. And again, people say, hey, in archaeology, we've discovered that there's other creation stories. Yours is just another creation story. And I go, actually, to me, that points even more to God and the God who is real. Because if you do have a look at those creation stories, and you have a look at the Epic of Gilgamesh and have a look at all these different creation stories, it doesn't talk about the why necessarily. So they may be similar. They may have but that was because it's a Mesopotamian worldview and lens that the writer from Genesis is working with. Yes. But at the same time, you're seeing this God who is literally creating a purpose. He's creating order out of chaos. And he is doing it through a Mesopotamian world lens and a sort of a structure in how he's writing. But he's giving purpose. He's saying, I'm not a God who's distant. I'm a God who's personal. I'm a God who's close. And so I think I mentioned before, I had never come across, growing up, I'd never been taught that Genesis was literal. Now, it's very tough when we say things like literal, because when someone says the Bible is not necessarily literal, people go, you're saying that the Bible's not true. There's a difference between it being literal and true, because you can actually be not literal but true. And when I say that, I'm talking like there are bits in the Bible that say things like greet each other with a holy kiss. Now, we're not literally going around greeting each other with a holy kiss. You didn't kiss me on the way in. You didn't kiss me on the way in. That would be a HR problem. You know what I mean? Like, we're not doing that. And so we're not taking it literally in that sense. But that doesn't mean that it's not true. Yeah. You know what I mean? And so when it says, there's 6 days with creation, it's going, well, what does that mean? What does that mean? And I love the way that this John Walton puts it. And I actually met John. He's beautiful. And I got a photo with him and I was really proud. It was a proud moment. I was fangirling. But he actually argues that Genesis 1 is not primarily about material origins, like the mechanism of how the universe came to be, but it's about the functional origins, like what things are for. And so that's really it's a good way of looking at it. But he also talks about how the word day in Hebrew is yom. And in Genesis, it's a literary framework, not necessarily a literal 24-hour period. And I think that's brilliant, because if you go, well, hold on, this particular Hebrew word has been used in other parts of the Old Testament to mean like a time period and not a 24-hour period, then that gives room for science to work with the Bible as well. And so going, hey, you might be listening out there and going, One thing that I really admired about John is that when he was presenting this in a lecture that I was in, he actually said, you might disagree with my viewpoint, but just please maybe just hold it in the back of your head, because you might encounter a young person who's struggling with their faith because they feel like they're in a position where they have to choose between saying, is the Bible real and true and authoritative, or is science? And when you are sitting in a science class and you've got all this data and facts that say the world is millions and billions of years old. By the way, I have fossils literally at home. I was talking about them before. I bought them from a museum. I didn't steal them. So I'm very into this kind of stuff. You might not believe it yourself, but having that understanding to be able to explain to a young person who's feeling like they need to choose. And unfortunately, one of the biggest stoppers of people between the age of 18 and 25, this is from data from 2019, so a little bit older, but still big data, is that they don't feel like the two can marry.
Right.
And they have to feel like they feel like they have to choose. Unfortunately, they choose what they feel like has the most facts. And for them, it's science.
Yes.
So they're rejecting the Bible. And if we can actually say, hey, the Bible is real. The Bible is truth, because it's God created the world. He doesn't tell us how he created the world, but just that he created the world with purpose. And so even just reframing the Bible.
Yes.
And I do understand that tension of people saying, if it's not literal, then it's not true. And if it's not true, then Jesus, in Genesis, then maybe Jesus isn't true in the New Testament. And I can understand where that logical fallacy can come from, but just trying to explain to people, just because something isn't literal in the English doesn't mean that it's not true.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the genres, doesn't it?
Yes, 100%. Yeah, genres.
Understanding the importance of the style of writing that the authors are writing in, and the intended audience and the context in which they're writing is so important to be able to receive the message that is intended through it.
Yeah.
So it does take some perseverance, doesn't it,
Absolutely.
to understand well
Absolutely.
what we're reading, because there's so many different genres throughout the Bible, but it's rich because of that.
Absolutely.
Just like all sorts of literature that we read now has all sorts of different genres. You can have a book like this. You can have novels, magazine articles. There's so many different, the parking ticket that someone leaves on your window is a different genre of, so many different genres, which we kind of take for granted. But when we look at the Bible, all of a sudden we seem to narrowly think, well, it has to be all this one way because it sounds like a narrative from beginning to end. So having that understanding is really important.
And I also think that it's a bit polarizing too, because sometimes when it's presented in a Christian worldview, Genesis is either sometimes presented as a myth or literal, and there's nothing in between. And when you hear the word myth, you automatically go, this is not a true story. And obviously being post-enlightenment, we just go, well, that's not truth. And you go, actually, no, it doesn't need to be a myth, or it doesn't need to be literal. It's actually called primeval history, if anyone wants to Google that. That's the genre, primeval history, Genesis 1 to 11. But again, going back to that genre being so important on how we read that. So it is true. God created the world. And also, it doesn't matter what, how you interpret it as well. Like if there are people who are like, nope, 6-day creation literal, or hey, 6-day creation is just a period of time, I think let's not die on that hill, but also let's not make our young people choose between science and the authority of the Bible. My goodness me. Yeah, we can actually marry the two.
Yes.
They can be.
They can coexist.
They can coexist and they can complement one another. They can point towards Jesus and God and creation and it's good. I don't even know what I'm trying to say. It's awesome. It's awesome. So, it's awesome. Keller says that science doesn't disprove God. It actually gives us clues to his existence. We've sort of touched on that a little bit, but do you want to give a couple of examples from especially from your science background?
Oh, my word. My favourite subject, especially in my second science degree, because in osteopathy we had the advantage of doing a lot of anatomy, which I loved. So we would have lots of opportunity for dissection, which I love, not so many of my fellow students love. So I got to do a lot of the dissection because no one else wanted to do it.
I literally avoided the anatomy labs. I went the whole long way around at Monash to get to my lab. I was like, I'm not going through there.
I was there. I was absolutely in the wet lab. So, but really, it just opened my eyes as to the complexity, which, I only fully understood once I started, really unpacking and literally dissecting, the human anatomy to understand how complex and interconnected everything is. You can take out, particular parts of our human body, like the eye, and just study that all on its own and just be awed by the complexity of, the function and the anatomy in the eye, which has your cornea and your iris, your lenses, has all that gooey jelly bit, but it has 274 million photoreceptors in there, which collect the light and create this chemical signal or electrical signal, that goes in the optic nerve and then gets transmitted to the brain. And only when it gets to a certain area of the brain does an image appear. So all of these amazing, and the the speed in which that happens, I think it sends something like 1 billion messages per second. And your eye can detect, I can't remember how many different shades of colour, but colour is all on this amazing spectrum. We use it in so many different ways. Again, going back to, if you're looking at science, evolution versus creation, as in God and an intelligent creator, intentional designer, understanding that, both the lens and the retina, because they need each other to function. So if it evolved, they would have to somehow have evolved together. So, the hundreds and thousands of, statistically random chances that would have had to have happened for that to occur, and for all of this to functionally, develop and evolve by some, random chance and mutation over billions of years is just an extraordinary statistical difficulty for me. I have much more faith in a creator God who is intentional about this. And that's just taking one little area out of the body, let alone how you as a whole person, how all of your systems interact in an amazing, complex and spontaneous and flexible way. Your hormones, your endocrine system, your musculoskeletal system, your neurological system, everything interacts with everything else all the time with backup and feedback loops, and it is so extraordinary. It always blows my mind. Doesn't matter how long I dwell upon it. It just blows my mind.
It's incredible, isn't it? And we're still developing and uncovering and discovering new things in science too. So it's not like we even know neuroplasticity. Like that is, we're scratching the surface there.
Absolutely.
This year's Nobel Prize for science went to a bunch of immunologists, who are still developing and discovering things about our immune system. And things are happening and developing and all the time. So it's not even like we know all this stuff, but it's almost like the more that we discover, the more complex we realize this whole entire thing is. And I always think about God and I go, God is sovereign. God can create the world in 6 days if he wants. He can create the world in 1 day if he wants. He's sovereign. He's in control and he can make it happen. He can use science to make it happen. He can direct evolution if he wants. I'm not saying how he did it. I'm just putting these things out there. And I go, but you can't deny that these things are so complex that, I think, there has to be some kind of intelligent design and purpose behind it. Because statistically, I'm a bit of a maths girl. Well, so I was before. Now I need a calculator. ChatGPT. But statistically, you go, this is almost impossible.
Yes.
Yeah. And if I was like a betting person, I wouldn't put my bet on that. Yeah.
You did cellular biology too, did you?
First year. Cellular biology with the major, you actually had to do anatomy, and I didn't do that. So I did molecular instead.
But even looking at simple molecules is extraordinary.
Yeah.
You think of, the most simple part of us is not simple.
It is not simple
At all.
No.
There's nothing simple about it.
Nothing simple
It's
about
extraordinary.
it. Yeah. So one of my majors is also immunology, and even that is just one of the most complex systems, like just the biological and chemical pathways that just it's very complex. Yeah, and it's complex.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's like a pinball machine, just like one thing goes and activates a whole bunch of other things, and you're like, oh, and the pathways change all the time. So yeah, it's when I say change all the time, as in we're still adjusting, and it's amazing. Yeah,
Homeostasis. It is huge.
It is huge. Yeah. I think you could be a scientist, and as soon as you start to delve deep in one area, it's just one tiny area, and then you go, well, you can't even be an expert on that because there's just new developments all the time. But as much as you can be an expert, and then you go, then there's the rest of the human body, and then there's animal biology, then there's plant biology, and then there's all these other science stuff, and then you're like, oh my goodness, astrophysics it's amazing. And when I think about that, and I think about God, I just go, man, he's a funny one. He wants us to always learn because he knows that there's way too much information that one human being cannot get their mind around.
Absolutely.
So yeah. It's a beautiful design. It's exciting. I love the science world. Love the science world. So how does what we've talked about shift from science versus faith to science and faith working together? Yeah.
So I hope what we've talked about can impress that science can coexist with faith, that it's, it certainly studies the how, and where we love understanding about the how, about, both us and our natural world, and, how, we interact with our world and how things, grow and develop. I think that's extraordinary. But it doesn't disprove God.
Yes, yeah.
It doesn't disprove God. There is no scientific experiment that has ever disproved or proved the existence of God. What faith and Christianity give us is the why.
Yes.
It's the why we're here, why we are on this planet in the first place. What is our purpose and meaning? Why have we been created? And I think the two are quite happily coexisting, not as a competitive or a sort of a conflict model where it has to be one or the other. I probably, like you, Shell, have many friends who are both scientists and Christians. And the two can quite happily coexist without tension, understanding science. Perhaps there's been some feeling in the past, as science has started to, have a lot more traction, that perhaps Christians in the past have been really fearful of science and have not wanted to
I think it's the fear.
publicly acknowledge that actually science is going to teach us a lot about the natural world. And, maybe there's been some messaging in that says, I don't want to know anything about science. And Christianity perhaps can be seen in some places like that as anti-science, which is not helpful, actually, I don't think.
Science points to God.
Science points to God.
How amazing it is.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
So I think the tension of holding, the great understandings that we have through science and how it points to an intentional creator in our universe and, in everything around us, actually is quite a beautiful message.
Yeah. As someone who obviously studied science and is now also studying theology and at Bible college, have you ever been in a situation where something that you've studied, you felt like it has led to pitting science and faith against each other? Like, have you felt like it's been complementary?
I haven't personally felt like that in my own learning and discovery about, the human body. Physiology and science and anatomy and biochemistry, all of those things. None of that has ever given me the idea that actually this science is all there is. This is the only truth. Yeah. It has always pointed me back to, well, the only thing that explains the complexities and the interactions of all these things is a creator God. I certainly have come across lecturers and tutors in my previous science degrees who were not people of faith and didn't have many good things to say about faith versus science. So I think there can be quite a lot of influence in some scientific degrees, perhaps, from people in authority to not really view those two things as being able to coexist together. But I think science, as you were saying before, Shell, can explain a lot of the how. Yeah. We have some amazing discoveries and great understandings about the how, and that movement in that Enlightenment period from what was considered, the dark ages where people would have faith in things, or they assumed, God was doing things that was later proved to be, something explainable by science. It's sort of, I think that feeling of, science will eventually explain everything so that, the God you believe in will sort of be shrunk down to this, you don't need him anymore. That is not a view I take. No. Yes, there were certainly beliefs before science had a lot of discoveries that people would attribute to God, the eclipse of the moon and, all sorts of natural disasters and things like that. However, for me, that just shows a greater understanding of our natural world, but it doesn't disprove that God is in it. Yes. God is still here. He is still in control, and he is still sovereign over everything in our world, whether you see, the good in it or whether you see the chaos in it. That is all part of the story.
Yeah.